Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Kalinga Literature Festival. I am so excited. Today we have with us one of my favorite writers, Chitra D Banerjee. She really needs no introduction. I think anybody who is Indian who reads, we've all heard of her. But just for a formality, here is her bio. Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni is an award-winning and a New York Times bestselling author, poet, and the Jean McDevitt Professor of Writing at the University of Houston. Her work has been published in over 50 magazines, including The Atlantic, The New Yorker, The New York Times. And her writing has been included in over 50 anthologies, including the Best American Short Stories, the O. Henry Prize Stories, and the Pushkar Prize Anthology. Divakaruni's novel, The Mistress of Spices, was made into a film, and Sister of My Heart into a television series. Her short story collection, Arranged Marriage, won an American Book Award, and The Mistress of Spices was shortlisted for the Orange Prize. Her books have been translated into 29 languages, including Dutch, Hebrew, Bengali, Russian, and Japanese. Welcome, Chitra. We're so excited to have you.
Thank you so much. I'm very pleased to be here. And thanks to Kalinga Lit Fest for inviting me.
Right, and I was just telling her I have so many of her books all over scattered between India and here, and I have like three of them here. And my favorite is Arranged Marriage, which is pretty dog-eared, and it's a short story collection, so you can always just go back, for an afternoon or so. And I wanted to jump right into our theme, which is writing women characters. You have such a great body of work. So as women, we tend to be more open, and so we tend to be perceived as being more multi-layered, more complex. There's more emotions, the way women interact with each other. There's just so much, and throughout your work, there are you have handled very delicately and very beautifully these bonds, which I don't know how else they can be expressed. There's this a reticent mother and her daughter's relationship in Queen of Dreams, and the beautiful bond between Sudha and Anju and Sister of My Heart. Some of the ones that have stayed with me, even though I read these many years ago. So, how do you write women characters? What is your process? And the bonds between them. They're spread over continents. They're spread over generations. Take us through it.
Thank you. Great question, Rituparna. So I have always been interested in writing women characters because it has seemed to me, at least, that over the centuries of literatures of many countries, many cultures, women are often pushed to the side. The story is told in a male voice or by, especially in the past, by male authors. And even when women are there, they're kind of interpreted through the male gaze. So I wanted to change that. I wanted to put my women right in the center of the book. And I wanted them often to tell the story in their own voice, or if I use third person, a pretty close third person, so the reader knows all of their thoughts, emotions, and reactions. And this has been true, pretty much right from my first published collection of stories, Arranged Marriage, through books like Palace of Illusions, which centers on Draupadi, who is known as Panchali in that book, through Forest of Enchantments, again centered on Sita, and The Last Queen, which is the story in first person of Maharani Jinda Kaur, who fought the British so valiantly. So I see a pattern as I go through my books. I love first person and I love strong women in the centers of my novels. And especially with the two mythological novels, Palace of Illusions and Forest of Enchantments, which I have over here. And I'm so happy that they are now published in a number of, thank you, a number of Indian languages as well, because I really do want to reach people who are reading in Indian languages, because these are such quintessential Indian stories, and yet they are different because I'm looking at them. What happens when the woman is at the center and she is telling her story? Because otherwise, in the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, they're very male focused, lots of battles going on, lots of heroic action going on. The women, although they're very important to the action and often central to causing those actions to happen, we
Yeah.
hardly ever know what they are thinking. So what I do, one of the first things I do when I'm creating women characters is figure out how they think. And each woman that I've created, I've tried to see how she is unique in her thinking. So uh, Panchali in Palace of Illusions is very different from Sita.
Mhm.
Their characters, how they think, how they react to events, they're very different to Maharani Jinda in The Last Queen. And here is a book, you were talking about women's relationships. This is before we visit the goddess. It's three generations of women in a Bengali family. A grandmother who always lives in Bengal, well, mostly in Bengal, but always in India, a daughter who comes to the US as an immigrant, and her daughter who always lives in the US. And so, how do these women relate to each other? How do they communicate across the world? And the grandmother and the granddaughter have never met each other. And yet, how is that connection created? So, those are the kinds of things that really interest me, to show these very different relationships. You mentioned Sister of My Heart, Sudha and Anju.
Yeah.
How would two cousins be so close? And that is, such a beautiful part of our Indian culture, right? How close we are to our cousins. They really are sisters to us. When in good
Yeah.
situations, they can also be our big enemies in other
Yeah, absolutely.
situations.
But that's interesting because in Sister of My Heart, toward the end, we understand how complicated the familial bonds were, and they are there for each other no matter what. And I was actually a little jealous because we don't have that in real life, but every woman needs that, every Anju needs a Sudha and vice versa. Uh,
Yes, yes. And I'm so glad you brought that up, because sometimes people laugh and they tell me you were able to create this perfect sisterly bond because in real life you have no sisters. So you created this out
That
of
is why, that is probably why you kind of made what would be perfect. That's the magic we have as writers, like Neil Gaiman.
we can use our imagination, right? That's
That's
our
right. That's
and
right.
that's the great thing, especially about being a fiction writer, because you can really
Yeah,
use your imagination.
have fun with it.
So, yes, no, you pointed out some very good things. And you pointed out something else, which is that women truly need friends. And so, in almost all of my novels, there are important women friendships that I'm showing. So, especially for Sita in Forest of Enchantments, her relationship with her sister Urmila is really important. Her
Yes.
complicated relationship with Ravan's wife Mandodari is
Yeah.
also very important,
I
right?
love it that you didn't whitewash over it. I was actually going to come to Sita the whole different question, but of course you can jump right into it. I love that you dealt with all the difficulties of that, and how the women still understood each other, Ravan's wife and Sita, in spite of their very difficult positions. And I think
Yes,
only women can do that because men would just get into their ego and I don't know. We're talking about typical male character, archetypes, and would probably have a
right, right. There are always exceptions, but I think, and part of it is social training, right? Men have been taught to like problem solve.
yes.
Women have been taught to kind of get along in order to come
Yes,
to a solution that is more inclusive.
right, right.
But there are women who are different, and Panchali, for example, in Palace of Illusions, she's quite feisty. She's
Yeah,
going to get up there, she's going to fight with people. And it's interesting that Panchali's most important relationship, I think, is with Krishna, who
yes,
is her best friend.
yes.
And I really liked how that came about. Okay, so I should back up a little bit and say that before I start a book, it's not like I have the character completely created in my mind. That happens as I write the book. It happens organically because as I'm writing little bits, I'm understanding the character better. So I understood, fairly early in the Palace of Illusions, that Panchali was a woman who didn't have other women around her who were her friends, especially when she was growing up. She has her nursemaid, Dhaima. She's important. She's kind of a mother figure. But for friendship, she doesn't. So Krishna becomes her friend. And of course, that is symbolic. He is the eternal friend.
And Krishna's very interesting. We had earlier on KLF, we had Sonora Jain, How to Raise a Feminist Son, and we talked about all this toxic masculinity. We're talking traditional things are different, and in the end, she said, of all our gods, we were just discussing how Shiva is hailed as the Indian archetype of masculinity, and that emotional detachment and stoicism can be so damaging in the modern context. And so we were concluding how Krishna is a much healthier option. He expresses his emotion. He's light. He can be queer. He's just more human in many ways. And
Yes, yes. And
he,
he has faults, he admits them,
yeah,
he does all kinds of things. He's just a delightful,
yeah, he's
you know,
delightful. That's right. He's
a delightful image of the divine.
yeah,
And that's what's so beautiful about our culture and our religion and our spirituality is that it does give us many models, but unfortunately, many of them have been lost as time passed. And
yeah,
so a kind of patriarchal society has taken some of these figures and blown them up, or taken some aspects of these figures and blown them up, so that we have forgotten. We
mhm.
have forgotten things like Lord Shiva, who is Ardhanarishwar, right?
Yeah. We
Equal
forget
parts
that.
male and female,
Yeah.
honoring both sides of the male and female persona. We kind of forget that, right? When we say women have to be one way, men have to be another way.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
these are some things I like to explore in my writing.
And I love that because it's so updated. And coming to Sita, the other work, of course, Volga's The Liberation of Sita, which is a very quick read. And I also love that, and it gives a voice to all the women in the Ramayana, Ahalya, all of them. So what?
Right. Right. That was really important to me because, Sita says it right in the beginning of the Forest of Enchantments. I will try to write your story because without your story, mine is not complete. And
Yes,
that's the kind of female ethos that I wanted to create, that, these women all add something to each other's lives. They transform each other. And that is the other thing I wanted to bring out about Sita, is how not only is she inclusive, but how strong she is in her inclusivity, in her acceptance of whatever happens to her. Because I think it's been a real problem, according to me, in our culture, that Sita has been portrayed over the ages, and only really in the last maybe 300-400 years,
yeah,
as meek and mild, and a woman who puts up with whatever happens to her. She allows herself to be abducted, she allows herself to be banished, and then she's held up as a role model for us. And when I went back and read the original Valmiki, and especially the Bengali Krittivasi Ramayana, I saw she's not like that. She is
yeah.
really a very strong character. She's a strong woman. She's a feisty woman. She stands up and tells Ram, "I'm not staying home with the in-laws. I'm going with you to the forest. I want
Yeah,
to share your adventure."
I love that because I personally always thought, even though I was born in the 80s, I was completely doctrinated by that TV show of Ramayana that you had, and everything. But I always, as writers, you're seeing things that are not there since you're born. I think the process never stopped. I always saw Sita as a feminist. um, and and I always felt really sorry for Surpanakha. And I love that your book, right from the beginning, you portray her that way. You show that she was a martial artist and she used her body. She knew how to use it, and at the same time, she was so gentle. She is the daughter of Mother Earth, Mother Nature, and she's healing. So I love that. There's no split, because today we see that in a hyper masculine world, a woman has to be aggressive, and then I know a lot of men will put that upon her. She's so masculine, or she's so aggressive. She didn't have a choice. But I love that you showed that a woman is whole. Even in society, we have Bhadra Kali and we have regular Mahakali, and that split is so dangerous. We are living those archetypes in our daily life. So
That's so true. You said that very well. These are I feel, the true female archetypes, and we mustn't forget them because they are such a deep part of our culture. The fact that Sita, when she is imprisoned by Ravan, fearlessly tells him what she thinks of his behavior. And he respects her. He is forced to respect her. And he does not harm her. I mean, how much strength of character does that show? That's our ideal. That's
Yeah,
our ideal, not the meek and mild Sita
yeah,
following Rama.
yeah. She's such a feminist. She's like way ahead of all of us. So, and coming to it, I want to always also make these current because that's the beauty of your body of work. It doesn't feel like I am reading about Ramayana or about Draupadi, about Panchala, about Sita in another world. I mean, it is that, but like we just discussed, it feels very current. I, as a woman, can relate every second chapter. I can like completely relate, and that's the beauty of great writing, that oh, this is me, or this is so many women I know across cultures. And that's why your work is so popular, touches so many. So in the context of all of this, what is feminism to you?
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you for the kind words. That is my hope, that women from all backgrounds, of all ages, will relate to these age old characters, but evergreen characters, and they will see how these women are evergreen. So, and I wanted to point especially to a book like The Last Queen, which is my newest book,
Hmm.
and how I create that. Because The Last Queen was a particular challenge. And since we're talking about creating women characters, I'm going to bring it up. And then if I don't answer your question, please ask it again and I will get more closely into it. So here I'm given a storyline already, right? Maharani Jinda has a life, and I want to be true to it. I don't want to change it. And I don't want to whitewash her, because that's also, again, a kind of a tendency we have in society, that the belief that women must be perfect, women must be flawless, they cannot have faults. I have strongly fought against that, I think, in all of my books. Women are human, just like men are human. And to be human means we have flaws. And we should not be ashamed of that. You know what I'm saying? It's
Yeah,
really important. It's really important to accept that women have flaws, and yet they can be admirable, yet they can be our role models. In fact, a flawless woman, which personally I haven't come across, Rituparna, I don't know if you have. It's,
definitely.
how can you relate to that? How can you?
Yeah. This obsession with robots, and people, I don't know, every now and then there'll be something funny in the news in which people would prefer to have a doll or a robot as a boyfriend or a girlfriend, because that would be flawless and would not have all the human things. it I don't know, I get so disturbed. Why are you even here? I mean, it's our flaws that make us beautiful. And I mean, that's why Krishna, with all
Yes.
that's why he's so entertaining and delightful. I don't know, let's enjoy our humanity rather
Yeah,
than
exactly, exactly,
beautiful.
exactly. And although men have been given a little more leeway, women have been more strictly admonished to be perfect. So one of the things I did in Maharani Jinda's story, as I wrote The Last Queen, is I made it clear that she had a lover. Okay, she was a widow. Her husband was long dead, but she did have a lover, and I did not want to whitewash that. Why should I? And
Yeah.
Maharani Jinda says, all around me in the court, people are having multiple lovers, multiple wives, and I love one man. Why is that a problem? So at least I want to bring that up for people to think about.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to catch hold of it in the US yet.
Yes, it's not out in the US, although, I feel very thankful that it's out in India and that readers have taken so well to it. I feel very thankful.
Yeah, it's your first historical fiction as well, right? I mean, we've seen you with mythological heroines. This is the first time you've broken into, you know.
Yeah. Well, I have a historical novel for young readers called Victory Song, and that is about the Indian independence movement and how children were part of it. So this boy and this girl become part of our independence movement, which was a historical truth. But this is my first historical novel for adult readers. So yeah, it was quite a challenge writing this book in the midst of COVID, because research became so difficult.
I
So,
would just come to
I
that.
really had to. So, one of the things that I did was really interesting for The Last Queen is you see, this book has Maharani Jinda's actual portrait on it. And I really spent a lot of time looking at her, trying to understand her character just from looking at her. Because, you know,
Yeah,
yeah, other
yeah.
research was not as possible. Therefore, this visual research, this visual kind of imbibing of her character became really important. It helped me understand her.
And so take us a bit through the research process, because we are talking about the craft of writing women characters. How is it different to write about a historical woman character versus mythological one? There's already a ton of material out on both of them. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot less on Rani Jindal than on Sita and Draupadi, respectively. However, so um, what is your process? Do you have certain freedoms that you do not with your other contemporary characters?
Well, it's different for each of them. Again, this is a great question because for a mythological character, like let's say Panchali in the Palace of Illusions, we have a lot of material, but it's all material of a particular kind. So I did a lot of research on the primary texts. I read as many versions of the Mahabharata as I could. And definitely for the Forest of Enchantments, I read as many versions of the Ramayana as I could. And that is the different versions of Mahabharata are different from each other, but not so much. But the Ramayana, oh my goodness, it's like all over the place. So we have Valmiki, we have Kritibas, who's like Valmiki but has some major differences. Then we have the Adbhut Ramayana, where Sita is a major character. That's where I got the idea of her being a warrior, because she actually is a warrior,
Yeah.
trained. She's a trained warrior in
Are
Adbhut
these, I'm
Ramayana.
so sorry to interrupt, but are these in English, and where do you access them?
Yeah. So I read Bengali and Hindi. I read some Sanskrit, so I was able to, but pretty much all of them are available in translation. And thanks to Amazon and Amazon India, and thanks to friends of mine who have sent me books from India, I was able to get a lot of these books. And fortunately for The Last Queen, I was able to get all my books before the lockdown actually really happened, and then no more books were possible. So for The Last Queen, I had my books, all my historical texts, right, written by people like Khushwant Singh, Amarinder Singh. There's a whole bunch of historical novels, historical texts, non-fiction historical books. But they mostly focus again on Maharaja Ranjit Singh, who is Maharani Jinda's husband, or they focus on her son, Maharaja Dalip Singh. And in between, I had to do a lot of like sleuthing around to find the facts that relate to Maharani Jinda herself. But I mean, look at how amazing she is. She was the last queen. She fought the British until her last breath, and she's been largely forgotten. So, I think that was a great impetus for me. I wanted to bring her story to life. So these are like the facts. And then there's the whole idea of how do you create the world? So what is the daily life of these women around like? And for that, you have to do a whole other kind of research.
Please take us through that.
Okay.
For the last scene.
Yes. So, and then I'll talk a little bit about how I do research like that for
Yeah,
a
yeah, yeah.
contemporary book. So for the mythological books, I read all of the original texts, and like I underlined all the lifestyle related information. What were they eating? What were they wearing? Where were they sleeping? Right? All of
It's sort of fun, like tabloid gossip kind of,
exactly. What was Panchali doing when blank, 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 right? So, but there are wonderful. I love our epics because they don't consider anything, especially the originals, too small. So, I mean, there are wonderful examples which then I put in Forest of Enchantments, where after the wedding of Ram and Sita, Sita's girlfriends are teasing Ram. They're saying, you are so dark, Sita is so fair. I don't think this is a good match. How is this going to work out?
Bollywood. Little bit,
Right. But like in Bengali weddings that I attended when I was growing up, that happens, right?
yeah,
The girl, there's a teasing and the night in the bashur after all the elders have left. There's a lot of this kind of teasing that goes on. So I love that.
yeah,
That Kritibas is so long ago is putting this into his text. So
right.
those are the lifestyle issues. So for the last queen, I had to do a lot of research into the lifestyle of Punjab at that time, the lifestyle of the court, and because Maharani Jinda, she's amazing. She's the daughter of a kennel keeper. She comes from a very lowly background. How would she have been brought up? What are
Mm.
the foods she would have eaten? And things like that. What would she wear? So it was great doing all the visual research of all the costumes of the Lahore court, which was very still influenced by Mughal culture. So there was a lot of that combined with Punjabi culture, and that would be what people would wear. There was lots of fun. I love doing visual research whenever I can
So
because I'm just a very visual person. Now, with something like before we visit the goddess, I drew upon a lot of my memories as I was growing up, and I interviewed women of my mother's generation. My mother herself had passed away, but I had interviewed her quite extensively for earlier books like Oleander Girl, which also have like grandparent characters. And I love like three generations. I often put three generations in my book because I think in these last three generations, we have changed so much, right? Our world has changed so much. In India, it's changed. In the US, it's changed. The changes nowadays are very rapid. And what does this mean for women? One last thing, I love putting food in all my books. I guess I'm just a foodie. And also, food is such a big part, not
yeah,
only of everybody's life, but of women's lives, I think, particularly. We pass on traditions through food, we remember through food, we have loved foods and hated foods. And food, I did a lot of food research for all of these
I've
books.
also noted the fashion, the clothing. You also put in a lot of that.
I love clothing.
Like, I love that. It's so girly, like all the things that women tend to love, and so it is very visual, and I can see it in like a period drama movie or something. Like it really comes alive when you read it.
Thank you. So that's the two things that I want to balance. I want to give a sense of that time because that's so important, right? That time, that world, that kind of magical space that is in Palace of Illusions, Forest of Enchantments, Last Queen. That's an older time, even before we visit the goddess, because the grandmother is living right around the time of independence or Indian independence. But I also want to make it contemporary. So I want to balance those two things so that the women come across as timeless. That's really, really important to me.
And they just stay with you, and they are timeless. I wanted to come to your life. Maybe it's very obvious to me, like, especially in arranged marriage, so much of it is based from your days here in Berkeley. I mean, I live in the Bay Area, you've been here, and it just, and as a writer I can see the process so much. We always say every novel is a memoir, every memoir is a novel, so how much does life play in it, in how much does your personal let me just put it again, how do your personal bonds with your mother, with the women in your family, how does that reflect in your work, because it's just there throughout. And as you're growing up as a student in Berkeley, having to explain you have a live-in boyfriend, or about your relationship to your mother, we're talking about a different time altogether. So tell us about that.
Yeah. So I think and people often ask me, like, how much of this is true in your life? Well, now they don't ask me that so much, but after I've written the mythological and historical
That's
novels,
what happens
they
when you
need to
talk to
know,
a
Queen
Spanish.
Chindan is in disguise. No. But so I think what in all of my contemporary writing, what I have taken into the books is the environment in which I found myself, right? So there are books set in the San Francisco Bay Area. Now that I live in Texas, before we visit the goddess, is set partly in Kolkata and partly in Texas, So these are places I've lived in. And I like having that geographical connection to my own life, because then I understand a place and I can write very authentically about that place. So authenticity of place is very important to me, because I think yes, that also partly set in the Bay Area. So the authenticity of place, I think, is important for me, because place influences character. I really think it does. So how are we a product of our place, the places where we grew up, which also means the values that we grew up with? I've often explored that. The stories themselves are not autobiographical. They're often set like there's a student at UC Berkeley, and I went to school there at the University of California. So I know the place. Again, the place is what's autobiographical, not what happens to her. So, people and my sons often joke and say, it's a good thing that you're a fiction writer, because, Mom, your life is very boring. You just get up and you go to your writing desk, and then you teach, and then you cook, and then you garden, and then you go for walks. Very boring. Couldn't have your novel, a novel based on your life would be a complete failure.
So I was just coming to that. Tell us about your writing routine. It's always, of so much interest. What time you wake up? What do you do? You know,
Yeah, yeah. I like to get to my writing soon in the day while I still have energy, and while, the mind is.
do you wake up at 6 a.m. and start writing?
No, I'm not an early writer, a riser at all. I get up, and that's why I have always requested my university to give me classes in the afternoon or night, because I just function better as the day goes on. So I do write early in the day, like maybe 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, and I'll write until I run out of steam, and then I'll go and do all my other duties. And then I like to write late in the night. That's really my favorite writing time, when the house is quiet. Everybody has been fed or they've gone to bed. And I love writing at that time. That really seems to help me get deeper into the fictional world, because my actual real life world doesn't intrude upon it at that time. It gives me a kind of quiet, almost a magical space to write. And I just write in my study. And I tell this to my students all the time. Don't try not to be that kind of writer who says, I have to have this place, I have to have this equipment, I have to have my special pen. Really, writing doesn't come from those things. So
Mhm.
just enter, I don't know, the dreamscape,
Yeah.
enter the fictional world. That's all you need to do. So you just need enough time and attention so that you can enter the fictional world. Uh,
So,
you
yeah.
know, uh, it's often been called the fictional dream, and I really like to think of it as that. When I write, I enter the fictional dream.
Right. I love that. It's like you're in a trance state, the world disappears. So even if your sons perceive your world as being boring, it is anything but that because you are, in Mithila or wherever.
Yeah. And I have to say that, writing The Last Queen during COVID was such a blessing, because we were getting so much bad news. There was so much stuff that was scary in the US, in India, all over the world. I felt so helpless. But when I went to write my book, I could enter that fictional world where I had a job to do. And
Hmm.
it really helped to keep me focused. And it really made me understand something that I had put in Forest of Enchantments, that Sita has said. She's, when she's banished to the forest, for example, and she's heavily pregnant, and it's through no fault of her own. And Sita says, yes, it's a terrible situation. I will do what I can. I'm not going to waste my time on saying, oh, lamenting about all the things that went wrong. What is the point of that? I will do what I can. And I really imbibed that from Sita. And, I think she was a strong help for me as I was writing through COVID. I will do what I can.
I had found that so interesting about Sita because she was not a mother yet, and I think becoming a mother makes you a little badass like that. But the fact that she was already that to me was very inspirational because like I said, we tend to be, a little more naive and lament and, get overwhelmed before that. But once you become a mother, you have such little space that you just deal with it.
Yeah,
Uh,
and I think it was that she knew she was going to become a mother very soon, right?
yeah, so
So she was like, I will focus on what I can do for my children.
yeah,
That became her,
yeah,
her motif for her life.
right.
And I found that so inspiring. Even when I was writing it, I remember, I'm writing the scene that Sita is being left by Lakshman in the forest, and I remember I was just crying because I could just feel. And that often happens to me when I'm writing my books. Now my family has got used to it. I'm writing and I'm crying, and they're like, "Oh, okay, she's writing some kind of emotional scene." At first, they would be like, "Mom, what's wrong?" Or my husband would come up and say, "What's going on?" And now they're like, "She's just crying." But I have to feel my characters, I really need to feel them in order to write them. I feel that if I don't feel their
How would
situation, their pain, their challenges, and their joys, how will my readers feel?
Yeah, absolutely. I always say writing is exactly like method acting. You become your character completely.
So
I
true.
because my last book was on Nawazuddin Siddiqui, and we had this conversation. Acting and writing are the same thing. Only one is private. And I wanted to come back to that. So when you are writing, and so much of your work is actually based on research, and you said you write in the mornings and in the night. How do you balance research with writing? How many hours at a stretch do you roughly write? Is it like 3 hours in the morning? And we're talking very,
Yeah, maybe let's say on a good day, 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the evening, or some split up of that kind. Sometimes when I'm writing at night and it's really going well, I want to keep writing. I don't want to go to bed, so maybe I'll stay up longer, write for 3 or 4 hours. My research process is different. I try to do all my research up ahead before I get the basic storyline going, so that I won't have to keep stopping. But the truth of the matter is, we are always going to find things that we don't know. So
Mhm.
then I will leave blanks and I'll leave notes for myself and I'll keep writing. But then when I finish that writing stint, I will go and do some extensive research. So sometimes I'll stop the writing for a few days and go and do the research, depending on how deep that research is.
So I was just going to come to that. So you would actually, if it comes to that, you would pause your writing and do the research, and you're able to come back into the flow of. Um,
Yeah, yeah. And what helps me to come back into the flow of things is I reread the last chapter I've written. And I really, read it carefully. And that helps me get back into that world, that voice, that time period.
and do you also edit as you go along, or is it that you've written it, edit
Yes.
the next?
Yeah, editing is one of those things. I do edit as I go along, even though I tell my students always, I'm like, don't edit as you go along, just write it. But sometimes I'll get a really good idea and I need to incorporate it into the earlier chapters so that I can continue with it in the later chapters. So then those are the times when I'll stop and I'll go back and I'll put it in because that'll change my character or it'll change what happens to my character. Other than that, I try not to edit. Like, otherwise you can be stuck in that perfect first
Yeah,
chapter syndrome.
whatever. And I think Walt Whitman had that with Leaves of Grass. I think legend has it that he just kept it, he was just
Yeah,
constantly editing bug, and we all suffer from it because I guess the first draft, oh, we are in love, and then by next day, what is this? And
exactly, exactly. You are
yeah.
so true.
And do you write by hand first? Do you
No.
what's the process? Just directly
Uh,
do you write in Microsoft
Straight
Word?
into my laptop, straight into my laptop. I
Okay.
always write into my laptop, but I have a notebook sitting by my side in which I'm making notes all the time. So if I think of something, but I don't want to go there, or I have a question, I have to look up something, or I have a new idea about how this character should behave. So I have my notebook to take notes. And at a certain point, I look at the outline. I really believe in outlining. It works for me. It doesn't work for everybody. But once I get kind of an idea
Mhm.
about the novel, I want to outline, like, even if in brief, the whole arc of the novel.
Yeah.
That's really important. And that was very important in Before We Visit the Goddess, because this is a collection of linked stories in different voices. And so I really needed to figure out how each story fit with the other. They're not just chronological. There's a different kind of reasoning behind how I put the stories together. So I had to do a lot of note taking. I like sketching, like putting relationships and family trees and things like that. So I do a lot of that as well.
That's really interesting to know. So, do you have, any other processes like? Do you? I don't know. You saw a picture. You said you're a visual person, and you saw a portrait of Rani Jindan. Do you paint? Do you sketch? Do you have music appreciation? Do you play? Just
Yeah, before I became a writer, I was a painter. So I painted for many years and wrote. But then I had to decide which one I was going to follow seriously, because I saw otherwise I'll just be,
yeah,
mediocre in both of them. So I said, at least I must try to focus so that I can be the whatever is the best that God allows me to be. At least I'll put all of my creative energy there. But the result is that I'm a very visually imaginative person. So that as I'm writing my books, I'm visually imagining. I'm visually imagining Rani Jinda in the Lahore court, or in hiding up in Jammu, or walking across the country trying to escape, disguised, trying to escape from the British after she runs away from their prison. So I'm very visual, right? And I think that really comes across, because people have often said that, oh, we can really see the scene, we can see the colors. I love colors. So
yeah. It shows. And how do you? So you don't paint at all anymore?
not anymore, not anymore.
Earlier,
Only
did you?
through words, only through words.
Nice.
And I say this also to my students, so I'll share this with our audience. It's different for different people. Someone like Tagore, he was truly multi-talented, and he could go back and forth. He had his paintings, he had his poetry,
Music.
he had his plays, he had his songs. But most people are not like that. I'm not like that. And I tell my students, it's a good idea for you to focus on what you want to get really good at, because Chaucer, the poet Chaucer, has a beautiful saying. It just hits me right here in the heart. He says, "This life so short, this art so long to learn." There's so much to learn just in writing stories. I could spend my whole life trying to become a better writer of fiction. So that's just how I feel about it.
Yeah, that's beautiful, and I don't think we ever stop learning because we never stop growing. So
No, that's so true. So the other thing on my website, chitradevakaruni.com, my motto on my website is a quote from Michelangelo, and he wrote this when he was in his 80s. And the translation from Italian means, I am still learning. How beautiful is that?
beautiful is
I
that?
am still learning. Very inspiring.
Yeah, and very humbling
Yeah.
um, because
These are great, great
yeah,
painters and
ultimate master.
painters and sculptors, and they
Yeah,
feel like they're still learning. I better still be learning too.
yeah, and it's so humbling because the process of writing is such a lonely one. I mean, especially when you're beginning, you've just okay, you managed to get published. That is another struggle, and
Yeah.
I don't know when it ends for most writers, So to to still have that humility and your craft is at the end of the day your main focus, apart from all the hustling. Um,
Yes, that is so important, Rituparna. You've really focused on something. Yes, of course, I understand. As writers, we must try and make a living also from our art. That's only fair and only right. But
mm,
the art has to come first. Otherwise, why am
there's
I doing this? If I wanted to make, if making money was my major goal, then surely I've chosen the wrong profession. I should have become, I don't know, a corporate analyst or something like that,
yeah,
right?
absolutely. So how did the character of Rani Jindan actually come to you?
Oh, that's such a great story. Again, very image focused. So, this is some years back. I have gone to Kolkata and I am there to promote my latest novel, which I think actually was before we visit the goddess.
Okay.
And I've come to the auditorium, the open air auditorium, a little ahead of time. And the previous speaker is speaking, and that's William Dalrymple. And
Oh,
as I come into the hall and sit down, he flashes on the screen this image of Maharani Jinda, and he's talking. His book was the Kohinoor. He's talking about how the Kohinoor was with Maharaja Ranjit Singh, and then it was passed on to Dalip Singh, and then the British took it away. And he's talking about the young Dalip Singh and his mother Jinda and how they were separated. The British took Dalip away as well to England. And then I just see this woman's face, and it is so, I don't know, it's so mesmerizing. I'm just staring at her. I'm saying, how is it I didn't know anything about her story? How is it that, again, I knew about Ranjit Singh and I knew a little bit about Dalip Singh, but I never even thought about his wife, his mother. And I said, I've got to research this story. And then as I researched it and I found out more about her, I was determined. I said, I have to write this story. She's just so amazing, fascinating, and sadly forgotten.
yeah, it's so interesting about how characters find us. I mean, J.K. Rowling said this when she was writing in a cafe. She actually saw Harry Potter as a boy in front of her, like very, very realistic. So, is it a mystical process at
It's
some?
mystical. It's totally mystical.
You cannot understand it
I
logically.
can't understand it logically. No. And I've come to terms with that. I'm just very grateful that this is what I do because I think in some ways inspiration comes from, I don't know, I want to say some kind of mysterious, mystical, divine place. I'm just thankful that it comes through me. So really, really, Rituparna, I never take credit for any of my books. I cannot, honestly. I'm just thankful that they came through me. If someone told me, can you write The Palace of Illusions again? I would say I cannot.
Yeah.
I don't know how I wrote it. I've talked about some of the processes, but really the basic inspiration that makes us right, I think it really comes from somewhere deep within and not in our control, not in the control of our conscious mind. At least for me. I mean, different people are different.
I think what you touched upon is, I mean, it's so humble, and it's just very beautiful because we have been even in India or elsewhere, we've been so westernized. We see ourselves as separate from nature, and all this is woo. But traditionally, art has always been channeled in all cultures, and nobody knows from where. And a story needs to be told. I wrote a memoir. I had no idea it would be magical realism. So even if for something like you're writing historical fiction, you're writing about a character that's well known, it still comes from, you cannot explain that.
Yes, amazing, right? The story I told you. If I had come into that hall 5 minutes later,
It,
that image would have been off the screen. He would have been talking about Queen Victoria and what she did to the Kohinoor.
right,
None of this would have happened, right?
right.
So,
And for you, those 5 minutes were divinely orchestrated. Only the Chitra could come and give us this book. So,
well, I wouldn't put it in that kind of egoistic way, but I
but
was
the
meant to be the instrument for this story to come to life. And that's why the universe arranged it so that I was at that place at that time and that I would get inspired.
and I see a picture on your back wall there of her. I mean, I can barely see it.
Yes, Harper Collins has been so wonderful. They sent me this poster, which immediately I put up because, yeah, her character really comes through that photo. And again, what I love about her, I'll tell you one last thing that I really love about her is that she is such a good mother. Flawed, but a really good mother. And the last gift that she gives her son, I won't give it away for our readers. She goes to England, which she hates. I mean, the British have been so terrible to her, right? She doesn't want to go to England, but she goes to England just for her son. And then she gives him one final gift when she's in England. And
God.
I'm
What?
not going to tell anyone what that is.
And what
But that is like, I was, again, talk about me being a water spout. I'm writing the end of Maharani Jinda's life and I'm crying because she was just such an amazing mother. She did something very, very difficult for parents to do, which,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I really want to
She
read it.
told him, I'll tell you just a little bit, she told him a truth that he did not know. And I think that is so important for us.
Hmm.
You know, sometimes we are afraid that the people close to us will be upset if we tell them a truth that is important. I'm not saying we should go around spouting truth all the time. That's
Yeah,
not smart. But when there's a really important truth that needs to be told, you know that from your writing,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
it needs to be told, even if it's going to make you like unpopular,
Yeah,
even
all
make
the
you
more
hated.
that's why it's even more important, and that's why we all warriors in our own way. Uh,
And Maharani Jinda was that. At the end of her life, she tells Dalip Singh a truth that transforms his life.
I can't wait to read it. We'll just get to the questions, Chitra.
Okay.
There are a lot of fans saying,
Yes, I want to say hello to all the readers out there. Thank you so much for reading all my books. I mean, I love you all. And if we don't get to all the questions, please come on my Facebook page and I'd love to chat with you there.
right. So, Neetu Narula saying, great fan of you, Chitra. Varun saying, interesting, more strength to you. Before you visit the goddess is amazing. That is also about female friendships and sisterhood. Many of our book club members wept while discussing the Palace of Illusions. There you go, your tears. I just, and
So glad to hear.
yeah, and the platonic friendships between them. That is the beauty of your characters. The gray shade. This is all Neetu Narula. Interesting, bold, Rajala Gundagani. Neetu Narula asks, what is your writing process? Do you go in solitude or do you have a podcast list or do you stop reading other authors or more? I think you have addressed quite a bit of it, but that's interesting to know. Do you have a podcast? Do you stop reading other authors or do you read
No,
more?
I don't stop reading other authors because that is reading is one of my addictions. But what I will try to do, I'll do two things when I'm writing my book. Before I write my book, like before I wrote The Last Queen, I was reading a lot of historical novels because I wanted to just see how other people had done it and how they'd created that time period and what I liked best about, let's say, books like Wolf Hall, which is based in the time of King Henry VIII. So I would do that. Once I start writing, I don't read that kind of stuff anymore because I don't want to get overly influenced. Then
Hmm.
I'll just read other fun stuff just to relax. So
Like,
I'm always reading or sometimes rereading fun stuff. I love rereading my children's books, like the books that my children loved when they were younger, because it's so relaxing.
yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
just
I
a
love
total relaxation.
yeah. Would you recommend audiobooks or ebooks?
Would I recommend a paper book or an ebook?
No, audiobooks or ebooks. I
Oh,
think.
audiobook or ebook? It really depends on what kind of reader you are. I'm a very visual reader. So an audiobook just drives me nuts because I want to go back and reread passages and I want to pause where I want to pause and I want to like look at that sentence, look at that image. So I read like that. I read like a writer.
Right,
So,
right. Just coming to that. That's how writers would read. But
right? So audiobooks don't work for me.
no, but I have revisited Sister of My Heart as an audiobook. I was just chatting with my librarian and she was like, oh, we have these Indian authors. And I think it was Sneha Madan or one of those who did such an evocative retelling. I cannot remember that it was another experience altogether.
Yes,
To
yes, and
translate.
and I have to say, I have great gratitude to the people who have put the audiobooks together because so many readers tell me that when I commute to work or when I'm walking with maybe earphones, I can listen to the novels and that way I can really get them done. I wouldn't have time otherwise. And some people say, before I go to sleep, I listen to them as audiobooks. I hope that's not because the books make them fall asleep.
No, that's and
But
also
so
the
it's just the kind of person you are.
yeah, your books I think help one get along with chores too, right? You're doing boring chores, you're taking a walk, so
Yeah, maybe when you're cooking you can um, listen. So different people are different. So whatever gets people to books, I'm for all of that. For a long long time I was totally into like paper books. I had to have my book. I would underline passages. I would dog ear books. I still like paper books, but I have largely moved to ebooks now, just because I think it is healthy for the environment, and also because I'm running out of space on my bookshelf.
also a lot of the books that you need for research, do you think they're more easily available on Kindle versus,
No, no. The research books I had to get, just about all of them, I had to get, paper books. And often I was very blessed because I teach at the University of Houston. It's a great place. They are so helpful. My librarian there really helped me get a lot of the difficult to access books. And I'm so thankful. I'm really thankful because some of them had to come from India, some of them had to come from England, but she helped me access them. And she managed to get it done before the lockdown, because after that, we couldn't get any books at all.
okay, so Tanisha Ray is asking, the process of writing a book is extensive. What do you do that keeps you motivated?
Well, you know, uh, it's like an addiction. After some time, it just becomes your life. It becomes your addiction. Sometimes, I'm down in the kitchen chopping onions and thinking, when can I get back to my book? Really, it's once you get into writing, that's why people write. It's just such a joy. It's just such a joy to create. And it's especially wonderful when you get good reader feedback. And again, I'm so thankful to all my readers, because they keep me they keep me motivated. Often on my social media, and you probably know, Rituparna, I love my social media. I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram, on
Very
Facebook.
interactive, and readers love that because uh,
I do. It's a way to connect to my readers from
yeah,
all over the world. So, often people will write, when is your next book uh, uh, coming out? And I have some older readers, like they're in their 80s and
nice.
70s. They're like, can you write the book before I die? Can you just go ahead
Oh,
and write it
oh my
down?
God, that's what you live for as a writer, right? Like it's I don't
Yes.
know, the great
It's so
reward.
wonderful and humbling to know that your book has touched someone's life.
Yeah,
It's just it's
that's
very satisfying. I mean, writing and teaching, I can't think of, and working, doing activism work with women who are in situations of distress. Those three things, I can't think of anything else in the world that I would rather be doing. So I'm just so thankful that I get to do this. I'm just thankful every day of my life, even when the writing's not going well, even when I'm stuck, even when I'm, having disagreements with my editor. It's all beautiful.
That's lovely. Mamta Nemanivar is asking, ma'am, I would like to ask whether the Sita you portrayed is different from the one we find in the Ramayana. She seems so much more contemporary and rebellious, which we have never read in the mythology. I think we touched upon this, but
Yeah,
let's.
I'll just repeat that. Please go back and, if you can at all, read the original Valmiki. If you can read the Kritibasi Ramayana, especially if you can read Adbhut Ramayana, if you can read Kamba Ramayana, which focuses very much on Ravan and Sita's relationship, you will see that the hints are all there. They're little bits, because, those ancient texts were largely focused on men, but the hints are all there. And that is one of the things I really, really wanted to make sure I did through research. I didn't put in to Forest of Enchantments anything major about Sita's character that's not in one of the earlier texts, because I never wanted people to say, oh, you've just created this Sita. She's not the authentic Sita. How can we follow her? How can we, trust her? How can we be inspired by her? I wanted women to know that, yes, this is the Sita who is in Valmiki. It's just that in popular retellings, she's kind of been lost. So that's really important for me. So thank you for asking that question.
Right. Aditya Bharat is asking, great, he's asked two questions. Great conversation, ma'am. How easy or difficult it is to portray a woman character in your writing? And we'll just come to the second one
Yeah.
after.
So how it's always difficult. So this is something my students, especially beginning students, ask me sometimes, does it get easier as you go along? And I have to say,
It
it
does.
doesn't really get easier because your challenges that you're setting yourself are different. As you're growing as a writer, you're setting yourself a higher challenge, a more difficult thing to do. When I first started writing, early on, I had the idea for writing a novel about Sita, but I knew I wasn't ready for it. I knew I didn't have the ability to write that novel. And at a certain point, I felt, yes, I can write that novel. But I set myself that challenge. It was still difficult. So it's always difficult unless you're just willing to write the same kind of book over and over. Every book is a learning process. And that's what makes it wonderful.
That's so humbling, and it's so lovely to hear that, because I wish I knew that when I was younger, because we would look up at people like you. I remember the Mistress of Spices had come out, and I was in college, and we just thought, oh, now you figured out your process, and that's it. But it is never it. It every book,
No,
it's like climbing a new mountain altogether.
it really is. That's a great metaphor. It's like climbing a new mountain. And that's why I want to say a word of thanks for to all my editors, my editor, especially my editor at HarperCollins, which published my last two books, Dia Kaur. And she has been so wonderful. And my editor, Lucia Macro, here in the US at HarperCollins here. And they are tough on me. They're like, Dia was particularly tough on me. She's like, this chapter isn't working. You need to rewrite it. I was like, okay.
And that's so tough because these are your babies, and you're already a mother, and you're so attached, and you wept over them, and now you have to kill parts, and how do you do
Exactly. I'm like, I
it?
don't like you, Dia. But then later, I'm so thankful because she helps. A good editor really helps make,
Yeah,
or a
yeah.
good teacher if you are in a class, if you're taking creative writing, a good teacher, it hurts in the moment, but it is really a great help. And as I realized very early in my career, I would much rather have my editor give me suggestions and point out what's wrong than the reviewer tell me what's wrong after the book
Oh,
is
yeah, yeah.
published.
Yeah, and it's so interesting you mentioned that because writing we think is a very solitary process, and the entire focus is on the writer once a book comes out. But there are so many people who go into making it, mostly the editor, but also
Mostly the editor, yes.
also all the stuff that goes into a cover, which actually makes you pick up the people who read, who give blurbs. It's not as solitary, like I don't know, and the teachers who help the beta readers. There's just it is a little community, isn't it?
It is a community. And I have to add to that community. I have a writers group. We have been working together for many years. We all live in different parts of the country, so we meet on like Zoom or Skype, and we share our work with each other, and people give me comments for my work. I give them comments, and it's been very helpful. So I recommend this for all our writers in the audience to find a writing community, even if it's like just two other people that you can show work to and they can show you their work, because we are often too close to our own work to know what are our strengths and weaknesses. I mean, I've been writing for so many years, but sometimes I'm just blind to something that's really clear to a reader. As soon as they read it, they're like, oh, you made her say this, and now you're making her do something that doesn't go with it. You
No.
better think about this, this kind of break in the character. So it's very helpful. I recommend that to everyone.
That's so lovely to know because Chitra, in America, this is very common. I also have a writers group, and the writers in my writers group have many writers group because I refuse to critique. We're just accountability. We literally are called shut up and write. Like talk for 15 minutes and literally shut up and write. But to have someone at your level who has been so successful to still be so humble and still have that accountability and that critiquing, I think that's something that's a big takeaway for everybody, especially for me too. That even when you've written such a big body of work, you still need that, it really helps to have other writer friends point things
Yeah,
out.
you know,
Hopefully,
because yeah, I mean, I'm just thankful that I have these people available, and that, I'm not too pig-headed to listen to them, because I saw writers, great writers, they would write a wonderful book, and then their next book would not be so great.
yeah,
Why is that? It's because, there wasn't someone else at a certain point to tell them, look, look at what's not working in your work. We just too close sometimes, and especially right after a big success, we become, I think,
a
less
little,
tuned to what the book really needs. And
yes,
when you've had a big success, there's also a pressure on you to publish your next book,
yeah,
because the market is just right for you at that time. And
yeah.
I tell my students, I say, don't don't do that. Don't give in to any pressure outside of yourself. You have to write the book, and sometimes you have to give it the time. Some of my books have taken much longer than other books. They just did. You have to be okay with that.
And that's great advice because so many of us, I won't name, but I have lost writers I have loved and adored, and they've been such a big influence on me and my writing for like decades, and suddenly they've fallen under the pressure. How can you produce a new book every 2 years or
Yeah.
every? And I'm like, I just lost you, and it feels like that. So it's
Yeah.
very personal, and then you as a reader, you get very bitter. So what you just mentioned is a way out because there's a lot of market
There will be a lot of market pressure. That's
business.
the downside of success, right?
Yeah,
But you
yeah,
are you are so right. You can, as an intelligent reader, you can see it right away. You can see that this book was written in a rush, and that
right.
the writer missed things that they could have.
And the writer's unhappy too. It shows. I mean, of course, I read as a writer, but all readers. I'm not naming, but I think we see it all the time. The market pressures.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So,
And yeah, and that's why I'd say one other last thing to my students, which is, don't think of don't think of your writing as your, like, money making device.
mm,
If you do it well, it will make you a living most of the time, right? But don't think of it as your primary source of income, because if you do, there's a conflict of interest right away. And which is why I am so glad that I teach. I mean, I love teaching. That's just a passion for me. And I teach only writers. So, I mean, what's there not to love? We talk about writing all the time.
yeah.
Sometimes I tell them, this is so much fun. Don't tell anyone, otherwise they won't want to pay me for it. But because I have that, I never think of my books as, like, under market pressure. You know, the book will be ready when it will be ready, and I just have to, um, I just have to persuade my editor, my agent, etc., that that's important. So there will be some pressure after success, but I think if you kind of make it clear to people early on that that's not how I'm going to write, then they are respectful of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this brings me to Virginia Woolf saying that if a woman must write fiction, she must have money of her own and a room of her own. And I think what he meant was this, that you do not depend, then there's too much going on. It hampers with craft, it hampers with your truth and all of that stuff.
Exactly. Yeah, you said it very well, Rituparna. It hampers with your truth. You cannot write the book that deep down you should be writing.
Yeah. And this is so important because the books choose us. We don't choose the books.
That's true.
With your last book. So another good question that Aditya Bharat asked is question to both of you, ma'am. Do you think women characters are always underrated by Indian writers?
Ah, that's an interesting question. That's a very wide generalization. I would not agree. I think, and I have to go back again to one of my early influences, mentors, like imaginative mentor, Tagore. Tagore wrote such beautiful women characters in that time, in that day. I think in Bengal, we really have a beautiful tradition of writers who managed to bring out the truths of women. There were many who did not, but I think Tagore and Sharath Chandra, these two writers have taught me a lot about women characters. I still go back and read some of them. I mean, they're still, in some ways, writing from the outside. It is the male gaze, but they've given a lot of thought, love, compassion, passion. They put a lot of that into writing their women characters. I learned a lot from them. So I wouldn't say that. I can't see that.
We have some, I think, of the more Gen Z type of questions here. Radha Kambati asked, on your computer, do you use any app to write?
And apps? No, no. I just write on Word, Microsoft Word. That's what I use. There are a lot of really good apps and programs. I know some of my students use them.
You
But
want to name some of them for, I mean, I know Scrivener is really popular, but if you want to name something that your students use.
yeah, no, I don't use any of them. But if you know some, maybe you can share that with our audience. Do you use one, Rituparna?
So I lost my first draft in 2006 on Microsoft Word, and I swore off it. And I until last year, that too I use it on a cloud subscription, so it's saved. So this is the worst thing when your first draft is lost. Okay, so
Absolutely, absolutely. And
yeah,
I'll say something. I'm also afraid of that. So every time I write a chapter, I email it to myself. I
there
have
you go.
several email addresses. I email it to all of them.
That's
And
lovely.
that's
So
where
it's
it's really,
relying on the cloud. Now I used to save it on a USB, but I have a toddler, and I don't know how melted chocolate got into the USB. Maybe that will be fiction in itself. So I use Google Docs, and the problem with Google Docs when it becomes 80,000 words, and your editor has sent track and comments, and then they cannot. It worked for me as a journalist for 2,000 word pieces or whatever, even up to 10,000, but then you just assume that it becomes a little bit of tension with all of that when you're going on your fifth edit. But I still
right.
by Google Docs because at least my work is not lost. Then you
Exactly.
can download it as a Word file, and Word has a subscription service, so it is saved on there on the Microsoft Cloud. And this really saves. I think the cloud model really works for me because I am so
Wonderful.
excited. It's like people are bitter after certain relationships. I'm very bitter after my relationship with the computer, which broke down in 2007. Still not gotten over that one.
I know. That is just awful. You know, that, yes, yes.
And
That's like the writer's nightmare. So
right,
I'm
and
glad that that's working for you. And for me, I constantly email my chapters out to myself so that I'll have them always. And
um,
yeah, so the
and
moral of the story for our listeners who are writers, please back up your work, like
yeah,
immediately back it up on various different
yeah,
devices.
yeah. Yeah, and other people in my writers group seem to use Scrivener a lot because a lot of the younger people are also, their process is different.
Yeah,
They also use it's also good for screenplay writing, or it gives you a page by page layout. So some people like that.
yeah.
And I use because I have a kid and I spend so much of my time around kids. I also use voice notes on my phone. I carry a little notebook. I have like stuff written all the time. Uh,
Yeah, I have a notebook also.
yeah, I now have too many notebooks. Yeah, scattered all over. So I consider a notebook an app, and I think Chitra mentioned that you take a notebook also for notes about your work in progress. You can treat that as an app in a way, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. So definitely, I like some amount of tactile
Yeah,
things. I when I'm like when I'm coming up with new material, like new ideas, I like to outline it by hand. That's really worked. Like for the last queen, at a certain point I knew it was going to be a uh, four kind of part structure with different ideas of her lives, or different parts of her life. So I outlined the entire thing in paper, and that way I had it like stuck up right in front of my on my wall next to my computer, and I could visually look at that as I was writing. So different things work for people. There's so much out there. You go with what you feel
yeah,
comfortable. If you are more high tech, go with the more high tech. But ultimately, pen and paper It's pretty good.
Yeah, I think so. You can carry it anywhere too. So yeah, we'll just go to. I'm going to give a comment. There's a lovely comment by Tanisha Ray. In the Palace of Illusions, the fact that Panchali silently loved Karn, and at the end she came to know that he also had feelings for her. I was literally crying. Thank you for writing such a beautiful book.
Thank you so much. I have always been really taken with the um, character of Karna because I felt that he is such a noble person and he's so badly treated by fate. So I wanted to make sure to give him an important role in this book, which of course he has. I mean, in the Mahabharata, he is a major character, but I wanted to bring this other side of his character into focus.
Right.
So
So we'll have to unfortunately keep it a little short. The questions are awesome, but we may have to both tone down our responses. So one of them is from Radha Khambati is asking, do you draw character sketches first or do you do a dramatic sketch first?
I do a character sketch first, and then the dramatic one develops from that. I'm trying to keep the answers short now, like you said.
Uh, you could, if you want to
No,
elaborate.
no, but I do the character sketch first.
Yeah, I think the story comes to the character, right? And then the character's growth drives the plot. Is
Yes. So, and then, as I write, I will be adding. So I have my character sketch on my notebook, and I'll be adding more things to that character as I'm writing the story and discovering. So the process of discovery is really important to me. I do not know everything about my characters. I do not know everything about my novel when I started, or even a short story. I have to discover. For me, it is an organic process.
okay. Zahid Akhtar is saying reading habits have decreased over time. How and what do you do to bring back the excitement of reading?
Yeah, I think you have to find books that you really like because I know when I find a good book, well, I don't have to do anything else. I just have to make time. So, finding a good book and making time. And how do I make time? People often ask me this, how do I make time for my reading, my writing, etc.? I just don't do a lot of other things. I watch almost zero TV. I
Same.
watch movies, but very selectively. And I won't just turn on the TV and whatever comes on, I'll sit there and watch. I will plan, like, I want to watch a movie, it's on Netflix or whatever it's on, and I will plan my time. And I have really cut down on my socializing because I mean, I have some good friends that are important to me, but like random socializing, it's not for me. So, I've just cut out a lot of things from my life. And when you cut out the unnecessary things, you always have time for the important things. That's been my experience. So I would really like to share that with our audience. And it's not just reading or writing, it's whatever is really important for you, whatever you love. You just have to cut out some other things and you'll have time for it.
That's so lovely. I'd just like to add to that. I think it's also what, if you are writing, if you want to write, you have to be very particular about what you read. With my journalism background, when I was reading The Economist, I mean, I love it. I was reading The Atlantic, I couldn't write. So I have had to stop reading journalistic stuff so I could write, a more flowy, fictional style, magical realism.
Yeah.
I have noticed what you read. It's like the food you consume will make who you are, and we forget that books, movies are all information. The type of movies you watch will impact the kind of work you want to create.
So
So,
true.
just be really conscious and mindful of what you're consuming, because, and then you probably, like Chitra said, will be driven to what is meant for you.
That's so true. And you put it very well, Rituparna. You have to be an intelligent consumer. I think this is true for everything in our lives.
Yeah,
We can't just consume whatever comes in our sphere, right? I mean, that makes no sense. You
yeah,
have to
especially
be,
social media. It's
yeah.
endless.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the other thing I'll tell writers, but also anyone in the audience. I love my social media, but I have decided this is how much time I'll spend on it. And this is the purpose for which I am on social media. I'm on social media to communicate with my readers. That's
Beautiful.
that's why I'm on social media. I want to and to communicate with other writers. So I often put up like advice for writers and things like that, or books that I recommend. But I'm not on social media for pretty much anything else. Sometimes I'll support nonprofits that I really believe in, and I'll, retweet or let people know about what they're doing, especially women's services. But, so I think Socrates said this very well. He said, the unexamined life is not worth living. And that goes for everything in our lives. So if we just examine our lives, we will be able to cut out so much. And then we'll have time for the really important things.
Beautifully put. Devolin Priyadarshini is asking, women have always been referred to as the other. Do the lives of characters in mythology, are they different from that of contemporary women?
And I would say that's a great question. My belief is they are not, right? And that's what I'm trying to show, that those age-old heroines, the human element in them that
Hmm.
lives on, that is timeless.
Yeah.
That belongs to all of us. Draupadi is us.
Yeah,
Sita
I
is
feel
us.
like that. Yeah, absolutely.
Jinda is us.
Yeah,
Someone like Shabitri, the grandmother, is us.
yeah,
The mistress of spices is us. And I really hope and pray that I can bring that out in my books, that they are us. We learn from them. You know, they live on. They transform our lives.
absolutely. Just looking. Okay, I think we're done with the question. So, is there anything else you'd like to add, Chitra?
No, I think you've done a great job, Rituparna. You asked such wonderful questions, and I love all the questions that came from our audience. So thanks to everyone for being here, and it's wonderful to connect. I am every day thankful for the internet. Without which I don't know what we would have done in COVID times. So I send my best wishes to all of you, wishing you health and happiness and safety through this COVID period. And of course, lots of good reading. I wish you all wonderful, wonderful books in your lives.
Thank you, Chitra, for joining us. This was absolutely marvelous. I learned so much. I've looked up your work for so long, and it was a total delight. And thank you, Kalinga Literary Festival, for hosting this. Have a
Thank you
lovely
to Kalinga Literary Festival from me also. And thank you to Rituparna. You were such a great person to have this conversation with.
Thank you,
And
Chitra.
all the best to you as a writer.
Thank you. Thank you.